So, okay, trilateralization is something you just mentioned. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's basically when you have like three different locations where at each location you've gathered like say reconnaissance, wireless reconnaissance on something. So you're able to grab like the signal strength of a certain device that's like somewhere in between the three locations that you've sort of scouted out. So like say for instance, I have these 3 points, there's like a Wi-Fi access point right in the middle of the 3 points that I'm gathering recon at. And basically, I can get the signal strength at each of these three locations and use that in order to determine like where a certain device was spotted using like angles and stuff like that.
Yes. And this doesn't necessarily just apply to signal strength either. You can also use this with GPS coordinates and distance. So a lot of different dating apps have a feature that allows you to see how far away someone is to make a determination as to whether or not, it's reasonable that you would ever run into them. And this feature can be and has been abused in a number of different ways. So this is a really, really good read. It's a little like they do it in the form of like a skit kind of, where like the scenario is that like you think that you're like a co-CEO is going to the FBI to rat you out or whatever, and like you gotta use their Bumble account to track them down. It's fine. Like, it makes it funnier. So it's much better than like a dry technical read. So if you want to read this and go through and see like all the hilarious visualizations and like the characterizations, like it's really, really good. I highly recommend it. But high level, what they did here was take advantage of a couple things that have been previously taken advantage of in the past, but they kind of moved it further down the line. So let me explain. Originally, a lot of these social media apps, or dating apps, I guess you call them, would send you the exact location of the user that you wanted to like get the distance from, and your device would compare it to the GPS location on your phone and give you a distance. Now, obviously, if you just snooped on your own network traffic, then that means you could get the exact GPS coordinates of where someone was. So obviously that's no good. And that meant that they were leaking people's locations, so they stopped doing that. And now they basically do this on the server side, and they just provide you with a distance, and that's okay. However, you can do what Alex just said with that distance in order to get their exact location. So if I spoof 3 locations within a city and then get the distance to a user, and it's a precise distance, then I can basically figure out exactly where they are.
That's scary.
Right. So first we had the exact GPS location, so they got rid of that. Then we had the distance, and that was ending up being too precise. So they got rid of that too. So now the new behavior is it will round on the server side, like up or down to a mile or so. And the code for this is relatively simple. You can imagine that it's just going to take a distance, and if it's like at 0.5, it'll go up.
Right.
If it's below, it'll go down. So that seems very simple, but that's the problem. That's exploitable.
I would have thought that would be common sense or like much more easier to implement rather than the exact location, because I feel like that's not even necessary
Well, I think
for something like this.
I think they were trying to be lazy, and like instead of having it be server side, they just pushed it out to users. But like in this case, it was just causing a privacy issue. So there's more here. Like frankly, they also had to deal with some signature stuff. So before they could start dropping like fake locations, they needed to be able to modify requests, and this was they had to go through and reverse engineer this a little bit to find out some hard-coded variables and some hard-coded stuff that allowed them to actually send the request. So basically, they were dealing with a signature generation algorithm that was like generating a signature that allowed the request to be processed. And if they didn't include this, then they were not able to modify or forward a request to Bumble. So but that's okay, because they went through the code and they found out it was actually just MD5.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so MD5 is you can explain what MD5 is.
It's a hash that I ended up covering in one of my videos on Google Collab, and I showed how you can basically like reverse some of these hashes or take a crack at them, but I'm not sure what they're exactly using it here for.
So basically they're using it to generate a signature. So when you're going to send a request to the server, it would basically take that request, MD5 hash it, and then combine it with a hard-coded secret password.
So like a salt.
Like a salt basic, and then send that along with the request. And when Bumble received that request, they would take the request, check the signature, and if the signature and the request matched, then they would process it. If not, they would ignore it. And that's just to like keep people, you know, like Michael, from like monkeying around in their system without a little bit more difficulty. So in this case, like they were able to make it just a little bit more difficult to like send these requests that would try to gather information about, you know, where a particular person is. But it didn't really work that well because again, it's just MD5 Obviously. And you were able to look around in the code and find this and use it to generate your own requests. So, okay, what they were able to do then is use that rounding to actually figure out how to like catch the breakpoint of where, okay, so let me visualize this. So let's say that you are in a particular position and I'm spoofing a location trying to find where you are. I can keep making my fake location, keep taking steps like away from you until the distance turns from like 1 mile to 2 miles.
Yeah.
As soon as I find that breakpoint, I know that you are actually like 1.5 miles away, basically.
I just realized you can do this virtually too by spoofing your location.
Exactly.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly. So this is what we're doing. Now I need to find Alex, but the server is rounding up or down to the closest mile. So I know I can find when I'm exactly 1.5 miles away from him by finding the breakpoint at which the app starts, or the server starts telling me, okay, this person is now 2 miles away versus 1 mile away. So it should flip at a certain point. If we can find this point in 3 different locations, then we have 3 different locations where we know the exact distance of the target, which means trilateralization. So like, you know, they tried. So again, first we went from sending the exact GPS coordinates. Then we went to sending the exact distance. Then we went to sending the rounded distance, but that rounded distance is just very simply rounded and actually gives you a very precise breakpoint for where it rounds from one to the other that lets you infer a very exact location. This is super smart. Honestly, I really like this. And of course, the end result is, you know, they do this, they execute the attack in theory, and they find out that Steve was in fact an FBI agent or like planning to sell it. So things look bad for our theoretical Steve, but things look good for our very real attack. And I just thought this was such an interesting way of exploring like how these sorts of privacy vulnerabilities can be like weaponized or implemented, because like this is a real vulnerability. And when people look at how to keep users safe, like, okay, obviously it's common sense. You shouldn't be sending out people's actual GPS coordinates. Like that doesn't make any sense, but you might not think that doing something like rounding up or down could be abused, you know, provided, you know, you're not thinking like this, I guess. Because at a certain point, the people are like, oh my gosh, how can we make this useful feature like less exploitable? Tons of people like this and a couple people are abusing it. So how do we walk it back just a little bit to still make it, you know, like useful? And in this case, they did something very simple, but because it wasn't very nuanced and it didn't really have the spirit of the problem in mind, it didn't work. So this, I believe that this vulnerability can be used in a lot of different things. Anything that gives you an approximate location, if you can spoof locations and then, you know, start moving around to determine where the breakpoint and the rounding is, and that breakpoint is consistent, then it does give you the ability to defeat some of the privacy features that are built into dating apps. So if you use dating apps, just be aware of that. But yeah, this was just probably my favorite story of the week because the way that they did everything was so brilliant, and the way that this ended up just working was really smart. Because if you told someone the way that the system worked and they weren't very like security savvy, they'd probably be like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, how would you exploit that? But then these people managed to find a way to do it, and it's really smart. So definitely recommend reading the story by Robert Heathton. And that is all the news we have time for today. If you guys feel like we missed anything, or if you want us to go deeper into another topic, or if you have any questions, please make sure to leave them on the YouTube channel. We will make sure to include your questions on the weekly Q&A that we are doing next week on Tuesday. So we hope to see you there on that next live stream. And yeah, I think that's it. Alex?
It's great being here. See you guys next week.
See you guys next week. Bye.